Going to sit down. We are here. Hello, Dr. Ruffin. We are here to honor and to celebrate. Whoa, a little extra sound there. To honor and to celebrate the life of Roberto Moraes. By the way, we're going to have an opening and a welcome from the mayor, but he's running a little late, so we're going to start before the welcome. I hope you'll be okay with that. My name's Ed Buckner from the Atlanta Free Thought Society, and we are all here because we loved Roberto Moraes. But we shouldn't kid ourselves. Not everybody loved Roberto. Men who wanted to keep women in their place very likely did not love Roberto Moraes. He was an activist. There are a number of us who are convinced that there was more than one Roberto Moraes because so many different organizations considered him to be one of their key activists, the guy we could count on to always be there. And yet there are 15 or 16 organizations here today to claim him. The mayor is here. I didn't realize he was here. I didn't know him. Mayor, would you please come and welcome us? This is Mayor Ted Terry of Clarkston, Georgia. And I've been advised that if all the speakers will stay behind the stand, if everybody applauds for every speaker, our program's going to run too long. So please assume that everybody's applauding for everybody.
All right, great. Thanks, Ed. Yeah. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I know we have got a lot of speakers today, and so I'll be very brief, wanted just to share a few reflections about Roberto from my experience, and I know a lot of others have things to add as well, but it's very nice to be here this afternoon. I was reminded of a quote from a philosopher that said, "Death is not the greatest loss in life. The greatest loss is what dies inside us while we live." And to me, Roberto was a man who understood that every day was an opportunity to make our community a better place to live. He campaigned for progressive candidates. He protested against unjust wars and was a shining role model for what one person could achieve with a relentlessly optimistic attitude. I love that word, relentlessly optimistic, because it doesn't matter what happens yesterday or just a few moments ago. What matters is what can we do right now. I actually first met Roberto, I think it was at a Democratic Party event. I want to say it was the Jefferson Jackson dinner in 2007 when I first started working for the Democratic Party. And really since that time, we had lots of discussions on policy issues typically, but we also talked about campaigning and other causes. And I really appreciated that he was very knowledgeable and passionate about these issues. And he also understood that in order for us to really affect change in our community, it meant that we had to get good people in elected office. And campaigning while you're young and agile is hard enough, but seeing someone who had physical access limitations like Roberto, but still campaigning with such enthusiasm and energy like he did was really impressive to me. He never let any of those limitations get in the way of discussing those important issues with his community and being out there every day. Last October, when I was running for mayor of Clarkston, Roberto called me one afternoon and he just said, "Hey, how's the campaign go? How's it going?" He'd been following my emails and Facebook posts, and he knew that I was trying to raise a little bit of money for a last-minute live call to some targeted voters, and I didn't even have to. Never even really asked him for anything really, but he called to say how can he help, and actually, in fact, he told me, he said, "Look, I'm going to talk to a few of my friends. I feel like some of y'all are here today, and I'm going to collect some checks for your campaign." And that's probably one of the the greatest phrases you can tell any candidate running for office is, "I'm going to give you money, and you don't have to ask me for it." So, I raised my $500. He collected many checks that afternoon and put them all in the mail to me. And in November, I was elected youngest mayor of Clarkston in their 130-year history. So I couldn't have done that without Roberto's help and all the people that he had brought along with him through his network. And one of the things that I think he recognized is that there is, and that I recognize from his activism, is that there is a balance that exists in all things in the universe. From the alignment of the stars and planets, to the seasons, to the trillions of individual cells that keep our blood flowing and our body moving every day. And balance even seems to exist in our political culture. We have decades where political parties rise and they fall and they rise again, and candidates even come and go, and then they come back again, and then they go and they come back again. And people like Roberto, those activists, they've always existed throughout the ages. And when one falls, another one or others rise to take their place. And as we recognize all of the things that Roberto lived for and accomplished today, let us also ponder the role that we will play moving forward to strike that balance that we've lost with Roberto. That how can we fill that void? And I think that we can be motivated by the notion that every day we can spring forth an energy that can change the very trajectory of our community for the better. Roberto did it every day, and so can we. Thank you.
I'm not sure we can keep from applauding, and we'll be here for a while. That's okay. And thank you very much, Mayor. As I said, not everyone loved Roberto. The sexist men, the people who thought it was fine to lay waste to our environment and not worry about global climate change, they probably weren't too fond of him. The religious elite who often mouth platitudes about loving everyone, they may not have loved Roberto. Roberto was not a religious man. He was very strongly in support of religious liberty and individual religious liberty, not corporate religious liberty. And in fact, corporate leaders in general may not have loved him the same way we did. Roberto was a strong advocate for regulation and for union rights and for women and against these people who believe that death and destruction can be a human solution when in fact capital punishment and war causes problems rather than solving problems. Roberto certainly understood that government, and in Georgia we have way too many people who don't understand this, including, unfortunately, a lot of people who are benefiting from the government largesse. Roberto certainly understood that government was an important part of the solution, provided that we had conscientious political leaders and citizens who would pay attention to what was going on. He was a strong believer in education, public education. He was a strong believer in covering the needs of the public. He was not one of these people who blame the poor, and the people who want to blame the poor for poverty are among those who probably would not be big fans of Roberto Moraes. He believed in public and private solutions for people who need help. One of the characteristics of Roberto that made him somebody we all love, and there were many aspects of Roberto Moraes' life, more than I know about for sure. We'll learn some more about him today. But one of the most outstanding characteristics is that he actually practiced, as well as said and believed, that you do have to be present to win. Whether it's standing on the street corner with the grandmothers for peace or standing for peace, Roberto Moraes stood for things, and he did so with his presence. He understood that if you want good political leaders, you need to go and meet with them face to face, and you need to go and talk to the voters face to face about in their neighborhoods about what candidates are running and what issues are important. So Roberto Moraes was somebody who understood that he needed to be present, and we wish very much that he could still be present. Unfortunately, he cannot. Presente. We are very fortunate and honored to have with us today two of Roberto's daughters, and I said he was very strong for women's rights. Could be that the fact that he was the father of daughters had some connection to that. I mean, his heart was pure, and he was strong for people that he did not have a direct identification with, but he has beautiful, wonderful daughters, two of whom are with us today, Chris and Vicky. We're going to hear a little bit later from Vicky. I would like for you to show by your applause to Chris and Vicky how much we appreciate their being here and how much we loved Roberto Moraes. Speaking of the environment and species, human of course, but other species as well, I would like to introduce Todd Daniel, who will give us some words from the Sierra Club. She'll stay behind the podium there. The sound will be better.
Hi, my name is Todd Daniel. I'm State Secretary for the Georgia Sierra Club. I've known Roberto since 1999. First met him at the Marietta Group and worked together with him on various committees. And the one thing that immediately comes to mind when I think about Roberto is this one memory when we were going to this mailing party, and it was at a townhouse, and we got there and there was no access to it. And I said, why don't we go around the back? So it was a long row of condo townhouses. So we went around and we went through the backyard, and we were going through all these people's backyards. And if you look right over there, there was roaring Rottenwood Creek. And he was right on the edge between the edges of the yards and the river, the stream. And I was pushing him at some parts. And I said, Roberto, you sure you want to do this? Yeah, sure. Okay, we can do this. And we finally got there, and we made it on time for the mail-out party. So it just really touched me more than anything, the fact that his disability never slowed him down, not one little iota. It was amazing. And that inspired me a lot. Roberto was my friend, he was my colleague, he was my fellow activist. He was a great guy. In the Sierra Club, he was involved in our elections committee, our nominating committee, and surprise, surprise, our political committee. And I could always tell when it was almost time for politics because I would see a little twinkle in his eye. He had a passion for politics. And the only thing he liked to talk about more than politics were his daughters. He loved talking about his daughters, and I have daughters too, so we would talk about our daughters a lot. And he had this powerful desire for justice in the world, not only for wildlife and the environment, but for people as well. And that always touched me. He had a special place in his heart for the plight of women around the world. And he and I went to some Planned Parenthood letter writing events. And it was really great. When I was super involved, I would see him 3 or 4 times a week. I would say, I just saw you, Roberto, at that meeting last week. So it was pretty cool. Roberto not only was an activist, but he was an activist in his personal life, which really motivated me because he was involved in energy conservation. A lot of people don't know he was involved in recycling personally. He believed in socially responsible shopping, socially responsible investing. So that really set an example, and it just showed to me that it takes more than just being at events and going to meetings. You have to really live it. I wanted to share a few quotes from him. I guess in the mid-2000s, I had the opportunity to interview him for an article in the Georgia Sierra Club newsletter, and I learned a lot about him. I learned that his inspiration for his politics came from his grandfather, who he thought highly of, and he told me some really interesting stories about his grandpa. But I wanted to read a few quotes from the article that I thought were really cool. This is from Roberto. I believe in being an activist in daily life. I believe in voting with your feet, or in my case, wheels, by shopping responsibly. I tend to question countries and governments. I am a faithful citizen of the world. And that's something that I've always felt personally too, that we're Earth citizens first before we give our allegiance to any government entity. He was one with the earth in many ways. I believe in doing our part, even if we know our part is minuscule in the great scheme of things. And that was my favorite quote. So I just wanted to say to his daughters here today, Chris and Vicky, that you had a very special father, and he was very special to me. Thank you.
If you haven't yet turned off your cell phone, we'd appreciate it if you would. I just now remember to turn mine off. Roberto Moraes, I never heard him use this quote, but he obviously would have agreed with the quote, and some say Malcolm X said it, some say it was a congressional chaplain before that, but a man who does not stand for something will fall for anything. And Roberto Moraes, he proved to us that you don't have to literally be able to stand for things that matter. The next speakers, we're going to have a group. This will be exciting and fun. It's actually on your program. It says Georgia Wand, and then down at the bottom, Stand for Peace and Atlanta Grandmothers for Peace. All 5,000 of them are going to come up here at once and complete what they have to say in 10 short minutes. Exactly what kind of minutes, we don't know till we hear. But this includes Becky Rafter, Bobby Paul, Ella Ruth Honeycutt, and I'm not sure who else, but Becky will tell us.
It's actually going to be, where's Joyce, and Bobby, and Ella Ruth, and myself. And so if you're with Georgia Wand, or Stand for Peace, or Atlanta Grandmothers for Peace, please stand. And raise double hands. And why don't you guys go ahead and come up so you can make sure to do the umbrella, the cane. What is the thing? Take me off the stage. So I'm really honored to be able to speak a few words about Roberto. Like many of you here, he and I had a really close connection, and I love that he was always very much the personal is political. And so at any given time when he and I were interacting, which I was so happy to see him in any meeting or protest or event, I knew it was a really good event if Roberto was there. And it always made me so happy to see him in the crowd and to go over and be with him. And so he always challenged me as a new leader of Georgia Wand. He didn't give me any slack, even though I've known him since the late 90s when I don't know when he came on the scene, or maybe it was when I came on the scene. But he was involved with women's reproductive health issues when I was involved in those issues. So when I came to Georgia Wand and there was a familiar face, I was so thrilled. And he welcomed me with open arms, but he never gave me any slack. And he was, at the same time that he was so charismatic and so powerful and handsome and joyful and present, he was so present in the one-on-one interactions. At the same time that he was all of those things, he was also always like, So what is your vision for Georgia Wand? Tell me. And so he always was challenging me, and then when we would talk about keeping an international perspective and making sure that we were institutionalizing an international solidarity, he always pushed me on that and reminded me how important that is, which is also a background of mine. And so he wanted to also find ways that more people could support the work. And so he also really urged us to start a sustainer program. And so Roberto was our first monthly sustaining donor, and he wrote me a check. And because it was a check, I didn't ever get a second check because we had not institutionalized it so deeply as to send the reminders every month. And so, but he was our first member. He might have sent two. He was our first monthly sustainer, and I've got to make room for more people to speak. So I just want to say it's always hard when you lose someone that you care about and they're far away. And you say bye to them and you expect them to come back. So that kind of sucks. But I will say that he did love talking about his daughters as well, and that he just loved you guys so much, and he was so proud of you, and he was so proud of his activism and his vision and his dream, but he really loved his family. And that was cool. So I didn't say half the stuff I wanted to say, but that's all right. Bobby?
Thank you. How many people don't know what Stand for Peace is? It's the first time you've heard of it. Okay, great. Stand for Peace started out of the outgrowth when, after 9/11, there were many people in the community who tried to make sure that we did not attack the people of Iraq. Move On, as you'll know, that organization sent out a notice asking people in August, when our Congress people were on break, to try to go influence them. Many of us did. It was Bobby Wren Banks, my predecessor, and other people from the Interfaith Coalition, and many of the people who are here in this room today, who organized outside of our then Senator Zell Miller's office at Colony Square to try to meet with him. He refused to meet with us. Some people went to jail who sat in his office trying to get an appointment to meet with him. After the first time, when we were downstairs and upstairs and unsuccessful, people decided we should do this weekly. And there was born this vigil, this Stand for Peace, which began in late August of 2002. And as you know, we were unsuccessful, and we did go to war on March 19th of 2003. So that's the history of this, and I will say that I have something to say with the Stand for Peacers. Should I? That was my 2 minutes. So do you want me to say a personal thing? Okay. Roberto, we believe, started coming to Stand for Peace at 14th and Peachtree in 2004 or 2005. Thank you, Ed. He remained a consistent member of this dynamic force of peacemakers until he last left Atlanta in 2014 to happily visit his family in Brazil. If Roberto was not in Brazil or attending an organizational meeting, the handsome Roberto was attending Stand for Peace from noon to 1 p.m. every Friday, and most likely staying for lunch in the Colony Square food court. You're all invited. Arriving fashionably late, I would look for his van parked on the street or his chair on the corner. Roberto was always willing, he was eager to hand out information leaflets that we prepared to those who passed by, most of them on their lunch breaks from work, especially during the height of the Iraq conflict. Most often, people accepted his offerings coming from a quietly outstretched hand. His inability to greet bustling strangers on eye level didn't matter one whit, for he had an enviable quality and ability to reach them, period. He engaged people when they spoke and people stopped. They listened to Roberto, and most often they responded with acceptance and sometimes a smile. The same was true for me. The corner could be teeming with noise, adding to the endless chatter in my busy brain, but if I was talking with Roberto, all fell away and we were connected, listening, speaking, sharing news, personal stories, and often laughing. He was a friend, a good friend, and the Stand for Peacer who always seem to make the circle complete. Thanks. Joyce Myers Brown.
Yeah, we talked about this yesterday at Stand for Peace, how we were going to do it, and we didn't figure it out, and we still haven't. But Roberto era meu amigo, o nosso grande amigo, um homem formidável, e vamos sentir muito, muito, muito a sua falta. Roberto was a great friend of all of us. We're going to miss him terribly, but on the other hand, we're not going to miss him because he's going to be there with us. A presence like that cannot die. We sat around the table at Colony Square a couple weeks ago, each one saying something about Roberto meant to them. And everybody had said such wonderful things and such heavy things and such moving things that when it got to me, I said, I think I have something a little different to share. And that is that Roberto, I speak Portuguese, Roberto used to send me these dirty jokes in Portuguese. I lived in Angola for many years, and I speak real Portuguese from Portugal, not Brazil. Anyway, we used to tease each other about the language. So that when he would go to Brazil, he would send me editorials and clippings and all kinds of things about things that we mutually cared about. But he also got me on the email circuit. I don't know who in your family or whatever started it, but I got lots of these fascinating Portuguese dirty jokes. And I didn't have anybody to send them on to. So if you speak Portuguese, you let me know. Roberto would like for me to continue to share. Thank you. Grandmothers for Peace?
I'm at the end of the line.
Well, your Grandmothers for Peace, which is very, very important.
Okay, fine. But at the end, I want all the grandmothers to come up here and stand up because they can share whatever they have to say. And right now, what am I supposed to tell them? I mean, what part am I supposed to tell?
Going to jail.
What?
Going to jail.
Oh, going to jail. Okay, that was a few years ago.
2008.
Thank you. 2008. We were down at where old Sears Roebuck. I grew up in Atlanta. I mean in Georgia, so I kind of refer things to the old Sears Roebuck. Right across the street is a development, and we went up to the what do you call the office where you get people to join the army? All right, we did that. And I remember one of our members she said, well, I don't have to carry a gun. I can work in, she graduated from the University of California. And very smart, PhD. And she said, I could serve, I could prepare food and do all that kind of thing. Well, people were all around us and they knew something. So we noticed a couple of more people came in, military. And after a little while, they decided we needed to leave. So we left. Then we went downstairs.
No, we didn't leave. No, we didn't.
But we did eventually.
We stayed. Once they promised to arrest us.
I thought they arrested us downstairs. They did. Okay. I'm glad y'all can participate.
We're going to come around.
Oh, good. Everybody
You
come.
called us up here and we didn't obey, so we will now.
Okay. Not at the end, I did. This is Minnie challenged them about she could get a job in the military too. don't have to carry a gun. So anyway, that was one thing.
And now we want to talk about Roberto. I want to talk about Roberto.
Okay, I have something to say about Roberto. Betsy Millicent and I, we had him over for Thanksgiving. We did a couple of times, and they gave us this beautiful wooden bowl. When I was growing up, my mother used it to make biscuit on. You know, about this big. But Betsy called it a salad, or Ray called it a salad bowl, and that was it. But it's so big, you can't. Okay, I was downtown. This was over 20 years ago. This had to do with the League of Women Voters. I was a member. I've been a member for 60 years. And I saw this vehicle moving around, and I said, "Who is that?" And found out it was Roberto. And but I tried to call before I came here about what year he joined the League of Women Voters. So that's another group to add to the list of his good things that he did. So that, anyway, that was one thing. And then
Did you all have something to say?
All I want to say is I've been standing on the corner for 12 years, at least 12 years for peace. And I'm a member of Grandmothers for Peace. And I never came one time when Roberto was there that we didn't have a big, big kiss and a hug, and it was so nice.
The last time I saw Roberto up close was on January 13th at the initiation of the Moral Monday, Georgia movement. And I was sitting on the on the second from the front row in the church, Central Presbyterian, some of you are members. And he rolled his wheelchair up to my aisle, and we talked about all of the mean-spirited bills that were coming through the legislature at that time, and what we could do to stop them. But anyway, I just remember that he was really concerned about those bills. And if you really love Roberto, I urge you to be at the governor's mansion on Monday from 4 to 6. We're going to ask the governor to veto those bills. Most of them made it through the legislature.
I met Roberto on Peachtree Street, and we chatted, and I wondered why he was in a wheelchair, because I had heard polio. And to hear this amazing person made it down everywhere, all the time.
Don't forget to tell about going to jail.
Oh, she said, don't forget about telling him to go to jail. They thought we were too old to go in the military. And I said, well, everybody lies. It just put me down as 40. I was 80 at the time.
The last thing we wanted to say was we really feel that Roberto has joined a chorus of peacemakers, and those that we have lost include the Reverend Ed Brown, the Reverend Buddy Hughes, Elizabeth and Courtney Seisloff, Ruth Schmidt, George Sisenko, Mike Vosberg Casey, Howard Honeycutt, Reverend Walter Baldwin, Ed Arnold, Evelyn Lowry, and perhaps I'm missing someone, and those we don't know of. But we really feel that these are peacemakers looking down on us. Thank you.
Just to add a note on Roberto, as far as I know, always rode MARTA. And he knew all the MARTA stations, he knew all the directions on how to get around in downtown Atlanta. And I'm a person who didn't grow up here. And I always get lost and don't know the streets. And many times he led me too. I just walked at him, and he gave me directions on how to get to the MARTA station or how to get somewhere else. And he always gave me a big kiss, too. So I appreciated it.
I really think we need 5 hours each, not 5 minutes each, but unfortunately, we don't have what we need. Next, we're going to hear from the ACLU and Chad Brock, an attorney that I have worked with and have great admiration for.
Thank you so much, Ed. Hi, everyone. I'm Chad Brock. I'm an attorney with the ACLU of Georgia, and we were among the many organizations blessed to have Roberto as a volunteer and as a leader, because he was much more than just a volunteer. I met Roberto back in 2008 when I was working on Jim Martin's Senate campaign, and we started organizing our field activities at the Democratic Party of Georgia. And you know, to know Roberto, of course, is to love him. And from the very first time we met, I was just blown away with his knowledge, his insights, particularly into politics, and just always enjoyed our conversations together. From the first time, after the first time you meet Roberto, again, you will always seek him out. Anytime you would see him at subsequent events, I would always seek him out. And again, have a very engaging conversation with him. And so after I worked on campaigns, I decided to go to law school, probably against better judgment. And my first opportunity to intern was with the ACLU in the first summer after my 1L year. And when I walked into the office, I knew I was in the right place because there was Roberto sitting there helping with the phones, helping with the intake, and he just really cared. He cared about the people who were writing into us. He cared about those people who otherwise wouldn't have a voice if it weren't for our organization and all of the great organizations here. So I don't have much more to say, but just that he will be sorely missed. He already is sorely missed. The last time that I saw him was at the legislature, and it was at the legislature this year when I received the news of his passing, and it really just hit like a ton of bricks. And you know, Roberto wasn't someone in the last couple of years that I saw very often, and so I guess I didn't appreciate how much loved him and admired him until received that news. But again, his activism lives on with all of you and all those lives that he's touched. So he will be missed, and thank you so much to his family for sharing him with us.
Next, we will hear from Common Cause of Georgia, Terry Taylor. Oh, looking the wrong way here, sorry. Sure.
Great, I can never figure that out. Yeah, I have to have mine stationary and fixed. An old Baptist preacher of mine said, Terry, if you're going to talk in public, leave two hands free for swatting away the flying eggs and fruit. My name is Terry Taylor. I'm a board member of Common Cause Georgia, and I'm here representing the organization today. I just want to know, now, I was gratified, I guess, to hear that every speaker had gotten that menacing email from Tom Barksdale. Leave your comments to 5 minutes. I was just curious, did any of the other speakers get something that don't be a gas bag? Did anybody? Okay. So, Tom Barksdale, I fear you, not as much as I fear Melissa Pike, but I do fear you. Okay. It was 2010. It was the 40th anniversary for Common Cause. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to ethics, accountability, and transparency in government. We put together a program celebrating that anniversary, and as you might expect, one of the first people through the door was Roberto. And I was really happy to see him. Now, I was new to Georgia, and Roberto was among the first people I'd met at several of our Democratic events in Cobb County. So, and you all know, he's friendly, easy to get to know, welcoming, and those are all good things, great things when you're new and you don't see a lot of faces that you know. There's another thing I liked about Roberto. Early on, we found that we had something in common. We were both graduates of the University of North Carolina. Now, living amongst the Philistines in Georgia who went to the University of Georgia and claim that it's the first state university, there's a qualifier there. The University of Georgia got a charter. They actually didn't have a school. University of North Carolina actually had things like students, classes, books, professors. So we always said we were Stacy is glaring now, so she's moved up. I'm more afraid of her than you. So I knew, though, right from the start, that my fellow Tar Heel Roberto was, being a graduate of UNC, he was a man of culture, good breeding, keen intellect, great sagacity, and refinement. And need I say, good looking. But then the program started that night. Our executive director talked for a little bit. Then he said he'd like to turn the event over to someone who came before him in Common Cause Georgia to speak about the history of the organization. And then he handed the microphone to Roberto. Now, I learned that evening that Roberto had been one of the early members of Common Cause Georgia, that in fact he'd been the chairman of the state organization. He told great stories about the lean and hungry years of Common Cause Georgia, where we operated with just a handful of volunteers and what would laughingly be called a tight budget, which in the nonprofit world is a euphemism for, gosh, I hope that check clears. That was very much like Roberto. And he's quiet, soft-spoken, unassuming. He hadn't said anything before to me about being in Common Cause and knowing or being engaged in it. He only talked when asked. He was never someone to boast about himself, even though he had done so much. And during his watch at Common Cause Georgia, and looking at some of the things that were done, there were just a few of them. It includes establishing reforms that led to the earliest versions of Georgia's Ethics in Government Act, setting state campaign contribution limits and disclosure requirements, creating the first state ethics commission, and establishing Georgia's open records and open meeting laws. Common Cause Georgia also led the fight to require greater internet access of campaign and disclosure reports for state candidates, which would make records easy for citizens to get their hands on for the first time. And that's just at the state level. Roberto also supported Common Cause's efforts at the federal level for ethics laws for Congress, limits on lobbyist gifts, reporting on lobbyist gifts, to name just a few. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." When it came to taking a stand for a good cause, Roberto did not wait for a crowd to show up and then join it. I know in our case, Common Cause, there weren't thousands of people in Georgia that were lining up to get into the Good Government Ethics and Transparency Club, especially one with a reputation for being progressive, but Roberto did. Common Cause Georgia today stands quite literally on the shoulders of those who fought the good fight in the past. Roberto's work and commitment made possible any victories that we have today and will have in the future. And speaking for all of us at Common Cause, we are blessed to have known Roberto and to have had him in our lives, and we feel especially honored to call him friend. I will say that others have spoken of Roberto in the wheelchair. After the first meeting, I never noticed.
I knew Roberto for years, and I did not know until I read the story that was in the Atlanta Progressive News. We're very grateful that they gave us permission to use it. I didn't know he was a graduate of the University of North Carolina. I don't know that he was keeping it a secret because he was afraid of Georgia grads. I don't think so. He was a man of incredible accomplishment, but he was not a braggart.
He didn't want them to feel bad.
Yeah, maybe. Our next speaker will be from the Georgia Association of Latino Elected Officials, Jose Blanco.
Thank you so much. Thank you. How was that trick?
He's got his own.
Hi, Roberto. You always got me in trouble. It's an honor to be here today. My name is Jose Blanco. In English, that's Joe White, and that's the way he used to call me. How are you, Joe White? How do you say that in Portuguese? Branco. I'm here on behalf of Jerry Gonzalez, Executive Director of the Georgia Association of Latino Elected Officials. But I'm also here for myself. I want to, what I'm going to say, if there's anything that you have to complain about, it's not Jerry, right? It's me. Because this is he was very meaningful to me. So this week, after almost 2 weeks of receiving the emails from the organization group, etc., so the big question comes, so what are you going to say? So, throw it up. Okay, universe, you lead me. And like 3 days ago, in a reading with my wife, came across Eckhart Tolle reading a book, New Earth, and the answer was there. So I'm going to read a couple of lines and then make a brief comment before my 5 minutes go away. And it goes like this. A New Earth, and the chapter Finding Who You Truly Are, Eckhart Tolle, page 211. Form means limitation. We are here not only to experience limitation, but also to grow by going beyond limitation. But also to grow in consciousness by going beyond limitation. Some limitations can be overcome on an external level. There may be other limitations in feel free to add in there, our. In my life, that we have to learn to live with. They can only be overcome internally. Everyone will encounter them sooner or later. These limitations either keep me, you, us, trapped in a resistant reaction. Eckhart calls it a resistant egoic reaction, which means intense unhappiness. Or the alternative, we, rise above them internally by an uncompromising surrender to what is. Roberto. That is what they are here to teach. Those people that rise above them internally by an uncompromising surrender to what is. They are here to teach the surrender state that opens up the vertical dimension in our life, the dimension of depth. Something then comes forth from that dimension into this world, something of infinite value that otherwise would have remained unmanifested. Some people who surrender to severe limitation become healers or spiritual teachers. Others work selflessly to lessen human suffering or bring some creative gift to this world. Roberto. And here is a concurrent incident for me, the coincidence. These lines describe that man who, because I saw him so many times, worked selflessly to lessen human suffering, to create a just and welcoming, nurturing society for so many, no matter what the tribe or the group. I must assume with little doubt that he was one who, through surrendering to severe limitation, became what he showed himself to me to be, and to so many of you: a helper, a facilitator, a teacher, a healer, and in that, a spiritual teacher. Not religion, no. Not about religion. I don't think so. I never heard him utter that, but always, 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 he raised my energy, my mood, my spirit, my life. He opened possibilities for me to address and to become. That was my friend, Roberto. I don't know how to pronounce it. And one more coincidence. Preparing for this moment, an idea. What's the etymology of Roberto? Here it goes. The name Robert is a Germanic given name from Old High German. And I'll attempt to pronounce this in German, even though ich spreche Deutsch nicht. Robert, H-R-U-O-D-B-E-R-H-T. I think it's something like Robert. A compound of Rod, which is fame and glory, and Bert, which is bright. Bright with glory. That was that guy.
Our next speaker is from the Cobb County Democratic Committee, Melissa Pike. Not here. Okay. You want it off the deal?
I'm Ruthie Levy, and I got elected by Melissa to represent her. She said, I've done enough funerals recently. And she doesn't do them well. But I will speak on behalf of the committee as well as myself. I met Roberto when I became active in politics in 2006. And I was a candidate running for the Georgia Senate. I also ran for the Georgia House. And Roberto said to me, well, you need to go to the Sierra Club. So I went to the Sierra Club, and of course, you know, he was there. And I went to the ACLU, and he was there. And I went to the Women in the Halls, and he was there. And most any place that I went, Roberto was there. And he, of course, he was always at the Democratic Party meetings, and he was at the Cobb Democratic Women meetings. And he was working for candidates. So I have to tell you that there was one time, well, many times, but for me, we were out campaigning in front of a school on a busy morning where we'd see lots and lots of traffic, lots of people in East Cobb. And so Roberto showed up. It was a sign waving thing, and he was there in his chair with a sign greeting people on the corner like one of the guys. And he was there with the rest of us, and it was really great. I could always count on his support for just about anything. Well, it really hit when I saw so many people and so many groups walking into this room. And I know that each one of us thinks that Roberto is seulement ours, only to us. And we have to realize that Roberto belonged to a lot of people. And we can only hope, as we continue on our way without him, that we will remember his legacy and continue it. Thank you.
I apologize. I knew Ruthie Levy was going to speak today. I thought she was going to speak in place of Diana Eccles. Maybe she's going to do both. I don't know. No, okay, my mistake. As you can imagine, it took something of a small army to organize all of this and to get this this memorial set up. The commander-in-chief of that army will be our next speaker, and I want you all to time him because he's the one who has told everybody, every other speaker, you can have exactly 5 minutes. You go 5 minutes and 1 second and we cut you off at the knees. Tom Barksdale.
You want this up here? Yes, sir. I'll be one of those. All right. Thank you very much. All right. Everybody, you got your watches out? Got this? Okay. Press. Here we go. All right. I first got to know Roberto when I moved back to my native Georgia 10 years ago and became active in Democratic Party affairs. Roberto was at first the petition guy. He was a guy I began meeting at the Democratic Party breakfast, etc. He always had a petition for a good cause for people to sign. And of course, I would dutifully sign because they were causes worth supporting. Then I joined with others to form, in order to bolster the Democratic Party or Democratic activism in Cobb County. Some of us got together and formed a group called the North Georgia Democrats. Others got together at about the same time and formed the East Cobb Democratic Alliance, where I have currently come to rest. Roberto's worth quickly became more and more apparent the more I worked with him. On his Facebook page since his death, if you've checked this out, you will see posted a recurring theme, and is summed up in the words, innate goodness. Roberto was one of those rare, innately good human beings. And it was from that quality at the core of his being from which his good deeds flowed like a mighty river. Roberto became a mainstay in each of the organizations in which I have worked, and we have all been honored by his presence. One of the fondest memories of my life, and I know of all my acquaintances, will be having Roberto Moraes by our side as we went about our common endeavors. Roberto had one other particular quality that I will always prize, and it has been noted by others here, and we should never forget it. In fact, if it's something I think we should walk out with, it will be this. And that was the time and effort he devoted to turning his noble thoughts into practical deeds. And that included the time that the two of us would go out door-to-door canvassing. Now, to some people, that may come as a surprise. Not to those of us who knew Roberto. It just seemed a common thing to do. Mike Hoskonet one day, and the next Roberto, we would go out and go door-to-door canvassing. I remember the last time we did it. We'd been out for about 2 hours. I got tired, and I said, Roberto, I'm tired. I think I've got to call it quits. Tom, he said, somewhat puzzled, we've only been out about 2 hours. Let's keep going. Well, he relented, and we called it a day. Few of us will ever be able to match Roberto's relentless activism, but he gave us all a standard we should aim for. It's not enough to think those good thoughts and speak the right words. We have to devote our time and efforts to committing the deeds that see to it that those good thoughts become practical reality. And more than ever, in the life of this state and this country, we need to do that. We need to do it this year. Thank you, Roberto, for honoring me and the East Cobb Democratic Alliance with your support. Thank you.
Roberto was the most incredible combination of patience and yet never being satisfied. I never saw him lose his patience. I never saw him lose his cool, but he never was satisfied. He always wanted more from himself and from those around him, and he got it. Our next speaker, and maybe he will speak in Portuguese as well as in English, and he's kind of a Leonardo da Vinci too. He's in charge of the music. He's in charge of, he's representing today the Georgia Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, Eric Voss.
Well, it was a shock to hear Roberto passing away, and then, of course, we had the session coming up this year. And fortunately, for the first time in many years, 0 anti-immigrant bills were actually passed, which was it's probably a lull in the storm because, you know, we've got the elections coming up. And it may not be the topic of interest right now, but Georgia is still extremely anti-immigrant from a political standpoint. And I think Roberto and I shared something, and that is he was a naturalized citizen, but I was born here. My parents are actually here, and they're very good friends with Roberto too, York Margaret. And they were Germans when they came here. I was born here, and I became an American citizen by birth, but I'm also a German citizen because of my parents. And so I have 2 passports. And so Roberto, I'm assuming, also had 2 passports because you do get to keep it. And many countries have become much more friendly towards dual nationality, including the US actually. But we've got such a long way to go in this country. After I guess even before, the Iraq War with 9/11, I think that's when Roberto geared up because we both saw the anti-immigrant sentiment growing, you know, the anti-Muslim sentiments. And so even though Roberto was a citizen since he was 24, right? He was, I think, 24 years old when he became a citizen. He felt like I did, that you had to, even though you already had the rights here, stand up for those other people that came to this country that may not look the same, may not speak the same, have an accent, and stand up for them. And so that's really something Roberto and I worked on with a lot of people who are here in a coalition called the Georgia Immigrant Refugee Rights Coalition, which currently is undergoing a much-needed hiatus, which I've already spoken with a few people here that we need to rebirth that thing with a new nominations committee. Right, Roberto? He's smart. So there's another Roberto. And there's a coalition that he also was very active in called Human Rights Atlanta. And so wherever there were problems, he would step in, participate in events, show up. And I think I posted on, Chris, I think it was your Facebook post. It was such a frustrating day when we had an important meeting. And he couldn't go in. So I think it's important to remember that, you know, the Americans with Disability Act is not effective in every building in this country. And a lot of the challenged organizations need to work on that. And even though the rent may be cheaper, keep that in mind. That's all I could say.
I think we can all understand why it is difficult not to get emotional as we talk about Roberto Moraes. Our next speaker from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Cobb chapter, is H. Benjamin Williams, and we are pleased to have him with us today.
Thank you so much. To those family members who are here, and Tom, with Barksdale, he's off too. Wherever you are, a lot of kudos to you for kind of driving this gathering. And I'm extremely pleased to have the opportunity to be here as well in my capacity as president of Cobb County chapter of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I'm also extremely pleased that the comments made in association with Roberto are associated with the life and times of our founder, Dr. Martin Luther King. I met Roberto shortly after I relocated to Cobb County, and as I have done in my tours of duty and movement around the country, became active with the local Cobb County Democratic Committee. Previous speakers have referenced Roberta always physically being the messenger of the issues. My meeting with him, my first meeting with him, was as he came into a meeting and I was standing somewhere, and yes, he had a flyer in his hand that he wanted to make sure that I got an opportunity to have. Did not spend much time with him personally, but was always aware as I moved about around issues that brought people together. More often than not, he was in the midst of that. So I began to think of him somewhat as a kind of a human Venn diagram. And Roberta would be that nexus into which all the moving parts, found their center. His work, which I followed a lot more than him personally, but of course, people become the work that they do. So that's my sense of connection and entity with Roberto. I think of him as a good example of yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. And he illustrated that in his person and his behavior. The other comment I would make before I take my seat, and a comparison, I can recall as a young man waiting in a hot, steamy church for the arrival of Dr. King, who I had never seen before, but had heard so much about. And of course, imagery for me posted him as being an overshadowing figure. Someone who, by statute, would be far above the norm. I had to reconcile that once he made his appearance, and I began to see someone of modest stature, if you will. But by his work, his shadow cast far beyond his physical stature. Roberto rolled along, unimpeded by being in a chair that carried him. Like Dr. King, he was not confined at all to his condition or his stature. He cast a really big shadow. And for that, I am impressed, and he will continue to be a source of inspiration. The struggle continues.
Our next speaker will be talking about Roberto's work with the Georgians for Alternatives for the Death Penalty. Peggy Hendricks. Want this on there?
Thanks. I'm Peggy Hendricks with Georgians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, and that's how I first knew Roberto. I got involved in 2004, more actively involved, and that's how we met. And we're a group that's a nonprofit that came together with the backing of a lot of other groups working against the death penalty to energize Georgians to end the death penalty here. Roberto was great, as many of you know. He's great at many things. One of them was lobbying. And he would always be there for our lobby days at the General Assembly and sometimes for other occasions. He knew a lot of representatives and senators, so he was an entree a lot of times for us to meet some of them, but he was very confident in speaking with representatives, senators that he didn't know, so he was just a strong presence there. He also, as has been mentioned by several people, he's very gifted at getting people to sign petitions. And we would have petitions to stop executions, we'd have petitions to have more funding for public defenders, or to try to stop bad legislation. Roberto was always there with those. He was very active in our efforts to keep Troy Davis from being executed. And unfortunately, that ultimately failed in September of 2011. But in 2010, there was a big push to get petitions signed by over 11,000 people in Savannah, Troy Davis being from Savannah, and the idea was to really make an impression on the district attorney in Savannah that a lot of people supported Troy and thought he needed a new trial. And Roberto, along with a number of other people here, during that spring, went many Saturdays down to Savannah to go around and get petitions signed. They wound up getting over 11,000 petitions with our help and the people that worked there all the time. So his energy just seemed like unbounded energy. Roberto was also strong handing out leaflets. I think that's been mentioned. Or whether he was on the street corner or at a rally or a vigil, he was buzzing around on his scooter and getting to more people than all of the rest of us. So that was another great thing about him. He also, as has already been mentioned, we were at the Capitol one time and we needed to go to a certain office, and I just automatically started for the stairwell, and he said, well, I don't know about you, but I'm going to take the elevator. But you know, you just lost track of the fact that he was slowed down at all by the fact that he used that scooter. He was a real strong participant in our monthly planning meetings. He always had good ideas about how to move things along, you know, okay, so what are we going to really do about this? And I just, as already been mentioned, I just always felt so supportive by his presence. If I went to one of our meetings or somebody else's meeting, and there was Roberto, and I think, Roberto's here, this is okay. And that was just something that I felt very deeply. Last fall, Roberto had cataract surgery, and the next time I saw him after that, we were at Stand for Peace Friday at Colony Square, and he wasn't wearing glasses. And he said he was so excited to have clear vision. And later that day, I thought, you know, Roberto, you've always had clear vision. And that's another thing that's been expressed here so much. I'm going to miss him so much. I felt the same way others have said here today. I got that notice. But I'm also feel like I'm strengthened by having known him. And Chris, you and Vicki, and you and your other sister, you had a wonderful father. And we just hope that you will let all your family know how much Roberto meant to all of us here. Thank you.
And now we will hear from Diana Eccles, despite the fact that I thought Ruthie Levy was going to take her place. But apparently she's going to speak for herself. Isn't that wonderful? Thank you.
We're often confused, you know, presidents, they just go along together. But if I were to stand here as a representative of Cobb Democratic Women and address any other group, probably folks will be wondering why a women's group was talking about their long-term member, Roberto. But you all knew him, so you knew that it's no surprise that he was an advocate for us, and he was always active on behalf of women. He had deep, deep roots in women's advocacy. Back in the 90s, Roberto was actively working with the National Organization for Women, and he was pushing to have Georgia ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. Now, as a man, that in and of itself is very impressive. But Roberto had even more to offer. He encouraged the women that he was working with on those projects to get involved with Cobb Democratic Women. Some of our very active long-term members became members thanks to Roberto's networking. Roberto was not a member of our group in name only. Unless he was in Brazil, he attended every one of our meetings and every one of our events. In fact, he often RSVP'd from Brazil. Hold me a spot, I'll mail the check when I get home in 2 weeks. So, always did that. And in his quiet voice, he'd ask, what can I bring? What can I do? And then he brought it, and then he did it, because he was a man of his word. When I took over as president, he would send me information that he thought would be helpful to our group, and I truly appreciated his constant support and thoughtfulness. When I sent the announcement of his passing to our members, in addition to words of sympathy, our members shared thoughts about Roberto, the man, not just about Roberto, the activist. Things like, he was such a good man. He was so calm and level-headed. He was always kind. He always smiled. While Roberto's activism with Cobb Democratic Women and all the groups in this room is truly legendary, the way he moved through life, the way he interacted with the people he met, is what we can learn the most from. All of us in here are painfully aware that progressive change in Georgia moves slower than molasses. But we never saw frustration or anger or disappointment from Roberto. No matter what the outcome, like to this day, Georgia's still not having passed the Equal Rights Amendment, Roberto just kept moving forward with quiet persistence, with dignity and grace, and always a kind smile. He seemed to know that the journey was as important as the outcome, and my hope is that we can all remember his example as we continue down our paths. Chris and Vicki, the members of Cobb Democratic Women, extend our deepest sympathies to your entire family. We're so very sorry for your loss, and we want you to know how grateful we are that he chose to spend some of his life with us. Thank you.
We have a little time now for some comments from the audience. We have one very important speaker that I want to lead off with in this period, one of Roberto's daughters. We have a state representative who was out campaigning this morning, but who has come, David Wilkerson, and maybe we'll give him a chance to say a few words. And we want to close with Representative Stacey Evans, who has been an important supporter of this whole effort and who has an important and interesting announcement to make. But first, I think we're going to hear from two of the Moraeses. Would you like to say something? You want this on the stand? Yes, please. Okay. This is Vicki Moraes, of course.
I wasn't a member of Toastmasters like my father was in the 80s, so you'll have to excuse me, Chris. I just wanted to thank everyone, especially Tom and Ed and Eric and Mike and everyone else that helped to put this together. It's really amazing that we were in Brazil when we were still hearing about that there was going to be a memorial for him, and it was just isn't a memorial normally put together by the family? So I guess you guys are all family now. Anyway, I just wanted to say a couple of things. When we were in Brazil, my cousins would ask and say, what does your father do in the States when he's there by himself? He's there for like 8 months of the year. What does he do? And I'd say, well, on Monday he goes to the ACLU meetings. On Tuesday he has some Democratic meetings during the week. Usually works on a campaign or so. Then Friday he has GARS where he reads aloud. Then he goes to protest. Then he has lunch after the protest. And then Sunday he's got Free Thought Society. And he's always complaining that the junk mail is piling up. He doesn't have time to read through it. And then he's got the emails, And so, and my cousin said, gosh, my father's retired and all he does is watch TV. And, I grew up thinking this was perfectly normal, that everybody's father did this. But then I thought about it and I thought, you know what? It's actually true. Well, we were asking him a couple of years ago, because my sister lives in California, and said, are you thinking about moving to California so that you'd be closer to Chris? And, because there was a possibility that, he was going to need help in the future and he couldn't live alone anymore. And he said, they don't need me in California. They've got lots of liberals there. That's the way he felt. In any case, then I just want to tell you a little bit about his life in Brazil, because everyone says, they knew a little bit about each part of his life, and that many people in the different organizations he participated in didn't realize he participated in the other organizations. And so maybe you don't realize what his life was like in Brazil. First of all, he planned his trips there either to go and meet my sister Chris, she would go for a month, and her kids, or to go and meet me, or both of us actually, because I would go in the winter and she would go in the summer. And he would also plan it related to the World Cup. And then if there were music concerts that he wanted to go to, that also led into the planning. So there was a lot of talk back and forth about what were the exact dates and all of that. Once in Brazil, he just had one brother, but he had 44 first cousins. So we had really large family, and my grandmother was always one of those people who organized parties, and when I was growing up, it was perfectly normal for us to have 15 people over for dinner, and just, cousins, friends, everything. My father still has a very close group of friends from middle school and high school that he meets with in Brazil every time, or he met with every time that he would go, and he was always watched the soccer games with them. And we always had, as soon as he would get there, he would start looking in the agenda to see what music concerts were going to be going on that we could go to. And so he had a very busy social schedule while he was in Brazil. Not an activism schedule, but that was his social time then. I just wanted to tell you just a little bit about the last week of his life. He had a minor stroke at first, and he was in the hospital, which was just down the street from my grandmother's apartment where he stayed when he was in Brazil. And so he went to the hospital in his wheelchair with my sister. My other sister was there. And then, since it was a minor stroke, he was awake and alert and everything for about 4 days in the hospital. And he had a room where the rules there were that there's only one person who can stay with a person at a time in the hospital. One person during the day and one person at night. But it's Brazil, so everyone bends the rules just a little bit. And he actually had a room on the ground floor with this big window that opened onto the courtyard that was filled with all of these tropical plants and very green, right in the middle of São Paulo. It's like an oasis there. And so cousins would come by, nieces, nephews. My sister was there constantly, my sister who lives in Brazil, Leah. And my cousin's kids would come by. Everyone was singing to him outside the window. He was singing back from inside the window. And so it was a big social event, actually. And then, unfortunately, then he went into a coma, of which he didn't wake up from. But even after he went into a coma, my uncle was there, and he was telling us stories about my father when he came here to the States initially in the 1950s to go to Warm Springs for treatment. And he was, he was regaling us with stories of the things that my father did, like teaching the other little kids swear words in Portuguese. And things like that. So I just wanted to close saying that someone else mentioned that my father wasn't a bragger, and that's true. We also thought he was just for us, and we didn't realize that his circle was so large until afterwards we started seeing all of the Facebook posts coming in, and we knew most of the organizations that he participated in, but we didn't realize how many people he touched all over the world. And just thank you.
And now we see a little better why Roberto was so proud of his daughters. David Wilkerson, would you like, you or Penny, or both of you, to say something about Roberto? David Wilkerson is running for re-election, in case that's relevant. I don't know.
Thanks. I do see a lot of familiar faces out here, and Penny and I were walking the neighborhoods with our kid and our son, and we were just thinking back over the years how Roberto has been everywhere. I mean, he really has. Candidates that you knew were going to win, candidates that you knew probably weren't going to win. I mean, I've been places where I go and I'm supporting the candidate and, good friend, and I know it's going to be tough for them. But Roberto was right there too. I mean, and so no matter where I went, Roberto was, and whether it was the 4th of July parade as my kids were growing up, and Roberto was there, and it's just like so many of you. I can't say much more except the fact that I'm lost a good friend. It's hard going after the family, but I lost a good friend, like many of you. So, thank you.
Anybody else want to try to steal Stacy's thunder? Yes. We do ask that you, anybody, not just him, keep it fairly short.
You know me.
Yeah.
Rich Pellegrino, CIA director, Cobb Immigrant Alliance. Not to be confused, by the way, with Larry Pellegrini, who I'm happy to be confused with because he's such a noble gentleman. But I want to say, Roberto, if you're listening, whether you believe he's listening or not, we feel his spirit, we feel his energy, and show up, Roberto. That's what you did. You always showed up. In Cobb County, those of you who live in Cobb County know, to show up is a big deal. Okay? And Roberto did that. He showed up, usually I'm late, and he was always there on time or before. But you know that white people are always late. So I just want to echo to the family and friends that he is part of our family, and he always will be. Thank you.
Betty, who spells her name right, just like
That's
my
right.
sister.
That's right, Bettye. I am Betty Harris. I'm a friend of Roberto. Like Todd Daniel, I was a fellow Georgia Sierra Club volunteer with him for many years. I also knew Roberto through his volunteer work at the Georgia Radio Reading Service called GARS. I'm no longer with that organization, but I managed the volunteer program for a bunch of years, and I think that's when I first met him. Each Friday, when he was in the States, he would come to GARS to do his weekly reading. He hosted a program called Other Places, Other Things. He read from National Geographic, Smithsonian, and he put together a lovely program of tales from around the world, and he usually shared with me when he came out of the booth what he'd read about, if he had a little tidbit. He was a great teller of tales. The description his daughters talked about, him going to Warm Springs, he told me that story. He told me knowing about FDR having been there and him going
for his therapy. You could picture being there. He talked about his family farm and how green it was. They started an eco-tourist farm at your family's farm, and I was ready to go. He was a great reader. His voice was magical. I'm going to try to get a hold of one of those recordings, because to hear him read one of those articles was magical. So in addition to all of his noteworthy contributions, he was a great artist and friend and interpreter and a reader of news and books for the blind in Georgia. So he supported lots of folks, and I will miss him.
Yes?
I hope you can hear me, because I'm not going to make it up there. But I'm Maria, and I first knew Roberto in the Sierra Club, and then later in the Democrats. How are you all? I recognize so many faces. And I just wanted to say, we had our own Don Quixote here. And he brought together all the best interests of the community. And it's all I can do not to break out in that song from Man of La Mancha, Dream the Impossible Dream. If I could sing Worth the Dark, I would. But that was certainly Roberto, and he certainly did a lot for us, and every one of us here appreciated and loved him, I'm sure.
Thank you. Representative Evans, I think we have finally gotten to you. Representative Stacey Evans.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I have the privilege of representing House District 42 in the Georgia legislature, which includes Roberto's house. And I'm sure that just like parents, representatives are probably not supposed to have favorite constituents. But I did. Roberto was my favorite. And the odds were against Roberto being a resident of Georgia and being a resident of Cobb to have a Democratic representative representing him in the Georgia General Assembly. But I'm so glad that he did, and I'm so glad that it was me. And it's really hard to think of the right word to describe Roberto, but the word that just continues to come to my mind is prince. He was just such a prince of a man, and he was so unselfish, and he was always willing to help you in ways that you asked, but also in ways that you didn't ask and probably didn't realize that you need. And I remember in my when I was first running for the seat, I had several people in the district sign postcards to their neighbors asking them to vote for me, and Roberto volunteered to send postcards to those in his neighborhood, and he happened to live in a very large neighborhood. There were about 700 of these postcards that he signed for me, and I was so appreciative. And I went by his house one evening to pick those up, and of course, like David and other candidates in the room, you're running around and you've got a million things going through your head, and you're physically going fast and you're mentally going fast, and I thought I was going to shoot in and get those postcards and get out. I ended up staying in Roberto's living room and talking about everything under the sun for probably 2 hours. And I would have never thought that I had that time that evening, and I never would have thought that was what I needed, but it was exactly what I needed. And Roberto was that same calming spirit for me, and I'm sure for many others over the years, and I will always remember his smile, and I will always remember his ability to make me calm down and see the big picture and just take a minute, and it was so important, and I'm going to miss that very much. So someone else is going to have to take that place for me. I was very honored to be able to pass a resolution honoring Roberto's life, and this resolution was co-sponsored by David Wilkerson and also every Democratic member of the Cobb County delegation. And I will read from this, and then I would like to present this to Vicki and Chris. This will be for you to take and keep. A resolution honoring the life and memory of Roberto Moraes and for other purposes. Whereas the state of Georgia mourns the loss of one of its most distinguished citizens with the passing of Roberto on February 24th, 2014, and whereas Mr. Moraes was born on September 20th, 1941 in Santa Cruz de Rio Pardo, San Pablo, Brazil. Whereas he moved to the United States at the age of 24, graduating from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in 1976 with a degree in political science. Whereas he would go on to work 12 years at the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development in Atlanta, retiring in 1990 after more than a decade of loyal service. Whereas for a brief time, he and his family relocated to Brazil to manage the family farm, and after his father passed away, they moved back to Smyrna, Georgia permanently in 1995. Whereas he was a staple at Democratic Party events both in Cobb County and throughout the state, and was a regular citizen lobbyist at the state capitol. Whereas for many years he was involved in countless progressive organizations, including the Cobb County Democratic Party, the Georgia Immigrants and Refugee Rights Coalition, Georgians for Alternatives for the Death Penalty, Georgia Women's Action for New Directions, Stand for Peace, the Atlanta Free Thought Society, and the Feminist Women's Health Center. And after being here today, I realized that there were so many more that didn't make it into this resolution, and I hope that you will forgive me. We probably didn't have enough room on the resolution if we put it all on here. Whereas he could often be found at demonstrations for issues he held dear, such as fair immigration policy and environmental protection policy. Whereas twice a year he visited Brazil, where he spent time with his many friends and family members, and whereas he was an avid fan of Brazilian soccer, especially the national team and Sao Paulo football and Sao Paulo Football Club. I'm sure I said that wrong. Whereas he was united in love and marriage to Judy and was blessed with 3 remarkable children, Vicky, Christina, and Leah, and 3 wonderful grandchildren. And whereas he gave inspiration to many through his high ideals, morals, and deep concern for his fellow citizens, and the devotion, patience, and understanding he demonstrated to his family and friends were admired by others. Whereas a compassionate and generous man, he will long be remembered for his love of family and friendship, and this loyal gentleman and friend will be missed by all who had great fortune knowing him. Now therefore be it resolved by the House of Representatives that the members of this body join in honoring the life and memory and express their deepest and most sincere regrets at his passing. Thank you.
Jorge Lawton, would you like to say a word? Yeah. And after he says his comment, we will adjourn and have eats and talk, and anybody who stays past 4:15 is on the cleanup committee.
Hello. Oi, tudo bem? Brasil. It's a hard adjustment to come to a gathering like this of strong folk, values who come out and speak and fight for your values without seeing in the front row very familiar face, strong gaze, direct eyes, often a mischievous glint in those eyes, and an appetite to go on. We chat in Portuguese, I love Portuguese. Go on and have what we say fofoca sobre futebol. Fofoca would be basically gossip about football, soccer. Fofoca about a política do Brasil, about Brazilian politics and manifestações, the demonstrations in the streets throughout Brazil, as persons this last year said very clearly, FIFA can pay for my fika, for my transportation. We're tired of seeing the misdirection of our taxes and being taxed twice for venues which we'll never really enjoy. Roberto appreciated that. I think he also would have very much commiserated. I thought of him as I got more and more and more lost in your suburban Atlanta counties, today, and I thought maybe Roberto, this is one more vengeance from Roberto, one more trick up his sleeve, that we talk about Sao Paulo, and I would complain about Sao Paulo and the traffic in Sao Paulo and the Campinas University sprawling campus and so on. He said, but Jorge, you're just as bad right here. And I say, hey, really? Thinking, when I walk from one spot in the city to another spot in the city, doesn't seem that sprawling to me, but believe me, in the last hour and a half, as I got more and more lost, Shallowford to Roswell to Magnolia didn't exist. I couldn't find the street and so on, so forgive me, Roberto. He would always also, I would try to arrive more or less on time. We say we have LPT, Latin people time. It stretches a little bit. It's a little bit elastic. And I would try to arrive more or less on time for our various encounters, demonstrations, meetings. He was so many things. Roberto was there. It was always there. And he'd usually get himself there, He'd be driving himself. And the obstacles, the challenges he had physically. To arrive and thinking you're arriving more or less on time, but he'd always precede you. He'd be there before. So it was a blow and unexpected to me. I thought of Roberto also, I didn't think of him as being confined to a chair. I thought of him as being a mobile and vibrant and very alive and very much expressing himself person, holding our feet to the fire. And I was very surprised, shocked, and saddened when I learned of his heart failure, his sudden heart failure. The only consolation to me was that he was able to be with his daughters and his family in Sao Paulo rather than far away. So I guess the one thought that stays with me as I send my thoughts to Roberto now, my pesares, that he's presenting. He's here with us. His spirit will continue here with us. The one thought perhaps is that if we're all engaged in social justice struggles, well, that brings us together. They're long-term struggles. If we believe that really grassroots mobilizing, organizing work is what makes real and structural changes that are needed so badly, then we're in it for the long haul. So we may not see a lot of those victories. So maybe the lesson is to start treating each other with the kind of love that Roberto treated us with. To really start taking care of each other on the road, because it's a road that's long and windy, as the Beatles would say. A long and windy road. So, Roberto, muito obrigado. Pensando em você agora, pensando em você sempre. Você é amigo, muito amigo, muito amigo. You're a real friend. E vamos a ter saudade. One word I think is very hard, and I'll leave you with this, to say, or to translate rather, into English is saudade, and yet it's a beautiful word. It's more than longing. It's more than missing. It's a deep longing that comes from missing something you love and care about. You don't have saudade lightly, but I have saudade now, and I suspect that I'm not alone. Roberto, may you rest in peace. Descanse en paz. Roberto Moraes, your example, your life, presente. Obrigado.
Please enjoy some food and some talk and love each other. Thanks.
I don't know, I should just play the music. I'll play the
Yeah, I
music,
think
but
the music
it would
would
be
be
great. Well, we don't have to announce what the music is, but I'll just play it.
I don't know who brought the wildflower seeds, but can you mention to people they can pick up a packet? Do you know who brought them?
I don't know. You want to mention it yourself? Go ahead.
No, you go. Your voice is commanding. They're at the table.
There are some wildflowers.